Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 116.
I am lovable and valuable just because I'm me. Fundamentally, when we can get to that place, that's when we have real freedom.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Mike Robbins. Mike is the author of 3 books, Focus on the Good Stuff, Be Yourself, Everyone Else is Taken, and his latest, Nothing Changes Until You Do. He's a former pro baseball player whose playing career ended due to an injury. For the past 14 years, he's been a sought-after motivational speaker who delivers keynotes and seminars to groups of all kinds. Some of his clients include Google, Wells Fargo, eBay, Schwab, Gap, and the San Francisco Giants. He and his work have been featured in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, as well as NBC News and the Oprah Radio Network. Since 2008, he's been a regular contributor to the Huffington Post, and his books have been translated in 14 different languages. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Rebecca, thanks for having me on.
I've actually used bits and pieces of your book, Nothing Changes Until You Do, on one of my personal sparks that I did on authenticity. And then I thought, why don't I just ask him to be on my show? So I'm so happy that you accepted. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit more about yourself, kind of the story of who you are and who you have become?
Well, geez, how long's the podcast? That could take a while. Yeah, I mean, I think, probably the most, salient kind of relevant pieces of my story that have sort of led me to do the work that I do. I mean, you touched on it a little bit in my bio there, my introduction. I mean, I was an athlete. I grew up here in California in the San Francisco Bay Area where I still live. Played baseball all growing up. I got drafted out of high school by the Yankees and didn't end up signing a contract with the Yankees because I got an opportunity to play baseball at Stanford, and then I get drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals, and I sign my pro contract, and I go into the minor leagues, which is what you do in baseball, even if you get drafted by a major league team, and you try to work your way up, and I was trying to work my way up through the minor leagues. Unfortunately, I got injured. I hurt my arm as a pitcher, and that ended my career. And when I finally got done playing baseball, I was just about 25 years old and had started when I was 7, and it was my identity, it was my focus, it was my life in lots of ways, and so it was challenging. But the big realization that I had when baseball ended, and I reflected back on the whole experience, I realized, oops, I forgot to appreciate it. I was so focused on trying to make it, and so, for me, it was a pretty painful way to learn a really important lesson about life and sort of what matters and how I want to approach things. But I was, at the time, pretty lost because I didn't know, what am I going to do now, and who am I without this identity? And so, I spent a few years working. It was the late 90s. I worked for a couple of internet, startups in the .com world. But I was really trying to kind of do more of my own inner work to heal from that experience, but also to try to learn from it and grow from it. And even at still a relatively young age at that time, I just kind of had this sense, this calling, this I think I want to teach. I think I want to speak. I think I want to write. I think I want to help people. I didn't exactly know how or what that would look like or who would listen to me or what, you know what I mean? And it was 15 years ago. It's not like it was 100 years ago, but the world was a different place just in terms of technology and sort of, even you and I having this conversation right now and podcasts and all the different platforms we have to express ourselves and communicate and connect with people. Many of those things didn't exist 15 years ago. So there were only a few kind of traditional routes you could go to try to put yourself or your thoughts or your work out in the world in that kind of way. Although, the early stages of a lot of what we're seeing now were starting to happen then. So I just kind of dove in and didn't really know exactly where it would lead or what would happen or if I could make a living doing it. But I just felt like I wanted to try. And 15 years later and a few books in and having a chance to talk to wonderful people on podcasts like you, like this, and here we are.
Well, and I love how you took something that was really negative and turned it around for something good. Can you just briefly kind of tell us how you felt that paradigm shift? I mean, you talked about wanting to be a teacher, but I just would imagine that after going through that, that was awfully devastating. You know, how did you pick yourself up from that?
It was hard. I mean, it wasn't a one-time thing. I mean, I think there were stages to the process for me, and I think that's true. You know, it's like grieving any loss. It was a loss. I mean, it was a significant loss.
Yeah, you said it was part of your identity. You know that
it really was. I mean, I think there was a part of it even at the time, and I don't know that I fully realized it. I mean, I loved playing baseball in so many ways, but there were parts of it that I actually hated, and I mean that in a good way, in a sense. It was stressful. It was, it was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of expectation. There was a lot of my identity was tied up in it. So, my emotions and my sense of myself were very much tied up in whether I won or lost or how I was doing. I mean, I think that's often true with the work that we do, depending on, but I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, which is the achiever personality type. So the dangerous thing for me, and I didn't know that at the time, but it's like to be so focused on achievement and recognition that it's kind of a blessing and a curse to be good at something like that, because you can get a lot of attention, which is fun, especially when you're young and adolescent and young adult, and all that ego stuff is really important at that stage in life. But it's also it can be hard. So there was a part of me that was a little relieved, even though I was almost afraid to admit it at the time. But it was very disorienting. And I would say that even all these years later, there are still pieces of it. I mean, I don't believe that we go through significant experiences or losses in life, and again, there's a moment where it's like, snap your fingers and I'm done, I'm good, I'm over it, I mean, I think it's like anybody. I mean, think of this. Even if you're happily married and in a relationship with someone, or even if you're not, almost everyone I know has at least one, if not a series of times that they really got their heart broken by someone. And, you've moved on and you're fine and everything's good. And, hey, I'm married now, I have kids and whatever. But it's like every now and again you have that dream about that person. And it's like, what is that, right? And you wake up in that weird sort of mixture of emotion of like, wow, I miss them. But no, I don't really. And yes, I do. And what is that? And I don't know. And then you don't talk about it. You don't roll over to your spouse and go, boy, I just had a dream about someone I was in love with 20 years ago. And it was really intense. And then, you kind of just move on with your life and you kind of go about your day and sort of forget that ever happened. But I kind of think that like the big experiences in our lives are like that. I had a moment not that long ago, a guy that I'd played with very briefly in the Kansas City Royals organization named Jeremy Affeldt, who got to the big leagues and had a very long, successful career, just retired this year. He pitched for the San Francisco Giants for the last 7 years and did very well, and I live here in the Bay Area. And I was watching Jeremy the last day of the season. They had a beautiful ceremony for him, and he spoke very eloquently and from the heart about his whole experience in baseball and thanked his family and teammates and got emotional. And Jeremy's done a lot of great work out in the community and a lot of things. And we knew each other very briefly when we played in the Royals organization many years ago. But I sat there, and I was really moved by the things he said and really excited to see him get acknowledged by this moment of like my own little sadness, because I was like, wow, if I had ever gotten a chance to play in the big leagues and play for a long time without getting hurt, like one of my dreams would have been not so much to even have all the success on the field, that would have been cool, but to have an experience like that, to have been able to use that platform of professional baseball to do good in the community, in the world, that was one of my deeper dreams. And so just watching that whole experience unfold, mostly I was feeling proud and grateful and excited. And there was a little part of me that was like, oh, wow, like that little sense of sadness and grief kind of popped up. And again, I just think, my story, everybody's got their own story. Not a lot of people get a chance to play pro baseball like I did and then get injured. But we all have disappointments. We all have failures. We all have things that don't quite turn out. And part of the journey of life, I think, is learning how to experience the emotions of those things and realize that they're complex, like most things. I mean, it's like I think about parenting, right? It's like I love my girls, and sometimes parenting sucks. It's like really hard and messy and uncomfortable and confusing. And I look at my girls and my wife, and I'm like, oh my God, I love these people, but they're driving me crazy, right? And it's like, how do you deal with that sense of, oh my God, I love this person, and sometimes they make me so insane I don't even know what to do with myself, and still function and still be able to love them and hug them and give them feedback and try to parent them and all the things that go along with that. It's like, it's the whole full catastrophe of life, so to speak.
Well, and sometimes when we focus on the things that drive us crazy about stuff, we can't focus on the good stuff, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's the title of my first book. Right?
Exactly.
But the funny thing is, again, it's like the book is that book. It's about focusing on the good stuff. It's not everything's good. It's not Pollyanna, pie in the sky. Part of the journey for us to get to an authentic sense of gratitude and appreciation is to really tell the truth about how we're feeling. And that's the thing that sometimes we want to skip over. And even in the work that I do and this idea of being positive and being, inspiration focused on I think sometimes we can sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
It's like, look, no, you know what? Sometimes in life, things are hard and painful. That doesn't mean focusing on the good stuff is an incredibly challenging practice, right? Because the world we live in is full of evidence for why there's all kinds of bad stuff and how we should be feeling terrible. And I can't believe what's going on. You see all the problems in the world, and it really takes an enormous amount of attention and focus and courage to show up in life and authentically be optimistic and grateful. Because there's a lot more agreement even in the abundant culture we live in here in the United States and in the Western world, there's a lot of agreement for things being bad.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go. You can find people complaining anywhere and everywhere. I love to tell the story of the first time we took the girls to Disneyland. We live here in California and we take them down there, and I was like so excited. And our girls are now 9 and 7, but I think they were like 3 and 1, or not even 1. They're way too young to go to Disneyland. But Michelle and I wanted to go, and we go, and we're all fired up to go. And I think we were more excited than them. The baby was kind of like didn't even know what the heck was going on, and Samantha, our 3-year-old, ended up being more freaked out by everything than excited about it. So it kind of was sort of
overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. It's overwhelming. But what ended up happening, though, was so funny was I started paying attention and listening to people and talking to people, and the primary conversations that people were having at Disneyland, there were 3 things that I heard most often in the topics of conversation. 1 was how expensive it is. 2 was how hot it is. And 3 was how long the lines are. And this is what we call the happiest place on earth, right?
Isn't that... every time anything earth-shattering goes, they have that commercial. What are you going to do next? I'm going to Disneyland.
But I think it's such a great metaphor for our culture. It's like, here we are in this abundant place. Now, look, some people like Disney, some people don't. I like it, but I can get how it can annoy people and whatnot. But the point of it is, here we are in the midst of this place, and if what you're going to do is focus on at Disneyland how expensive it is, how long the lines are, and how hot it is, you're going to have a miserable time.
Yeah.
Because you know what? The lines are kind of long most of the time. It is expensive, and it can get hot in Anaheim or if you go to Disney World in Orlando. But if that's what you choose to focus on, that's your problem. Do you know what I mean? And that's a metaphor for life. what are we paying attention to? And there's a difference between feeling authentic emotion than there is whining and complaining. So I tried not to when, this is a long way back to your original question, but when I hurt my arm, I actually had an insight at one point early in the process. And I went, you know what? I don't know why this happened. I don't like that this happened. I don't understand why this happened. But I don't want to, I saw myself, I fast forwarded my life to 50, 60, 70 years old. And I thought, you know what? I could see myself sitting at the end of a bar telling stories about how I used to be.
Yeah, the glory days. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I saw that. And that was a very likely scenario. And I thought, you know what? I don't want that life. I don't want this to be the thing that I'm going to tell the stories of how I could have been somebody, and that's going to be the story of my life. Now, I don't know. I got to create a new story, right? And I didn't know exactly at the time, and it took me a while to figure out what that was going to be. But at some level, it was a commitment to myself that I want to deal with the emotions I have about this. I want to look at this process and experience this even though it's uncomfortable, and I don't want to let it define me. And that's a choice, and all of us. It's and there are times in life where, I've talked to enough people over the years that have dealt with unbelievably challenging circumstances. The loss of a spouse or a child, the end of a dream, the collapse of a business, just all kind of physical maladies and ailment. You name it. And even from things that aren't quite as serious and significant. And the question becomes, are we going to give our life away to that story and to that circumstance? It doesn't mean somehow we're made of steel and we don't feel it, but it doesn't have to be. I have a friend whose husband committed suicide 10 years ago.
Wow.
And she, with a teenage son at the time, he's now, her son's in his mid to late 20s, and it was a horrendous experience. But she's one of the happiest people that I know, and she's human. she just celebrated a birthday. We were on the phone the other day. I said, "How you doing?" And she said, my birthday's tough sometimes. It comes up. She's remarried, very happy. But like, if you met her and talked to her, I mean, it's not that she would tell you right away or not tell you, but you would eventually find that out as her story. And look, she's got a lot of evidence and a lot of reason why she could be bitter and angry for the rest of her life, right?
Yeah.
But she just chose, like, it wasn't like, again, some magic potion, but she chose, like, it's not going to define me. And I think ultimately for all of us, like, that's what it takes. And that's really, my new book, Nothing Changes Until You Do, that's what it's about. It's that inner work we do with ourselves. What's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves and about our lives? Because that ultimately is what defines us.
Yeah. Well, and we are in the Facebook world anymore, where everyone sees all the Pollyannish stuff, and we don't dare, put down that wall and expose the workings behind. And what would you say, I mean, is that important to do? I mean, kind of going from one book to the other of focusing on the good stuff versus being authentic. How do we combine those two and help people,
Right.
But then also, focus on those good stuff?
Well, the first book, Focus on the Good Stuff. The second book is, on authenticity, be yourself, everyone else is already taken. And they're actually related. On the surface, they almost look like they can be a bit contradictory. But in reality, look, to be able to focus on the good stuff, to be able to practice being grateful and appreciative, what's essential in that is being authentic and real about it, right? Pollyanna, like, affirmation for the sake of affirmation, kind of fake it till you make it. Hey, I'm all good. Everything's good. Everything's great. It's like, we all know, it's like the saying, you put icing on mud, it doesn't make it a cake. Right? So at some level, what we got to be willing to do is deal authentically with who we are, where we are, how we feel, what's going on.
Yeah, because eventually, I mean, if you keep that facade up, it can cause a breakdown in yourself, as well as I look at other people around us too, and if we look like we are never struggling with anything, I think that doesn't help them either, because then they're like, why isn't my life going like, so-and-so's, because she seems so happy all the time.
Right. Right, and I think, look, I mean, to your point about Facebook, it's like, it's funny, I just posted something on Facebook about a week and a half ago about this, and I posted that, like, I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. And for a couple of reasons. It's like, I love it because, oh my gosh, I can reconnect with old friends. I get to see all kinds of stuff happening in people's lives. I get to share things both personally, and then with my business. It's a great platform to share stuff with the world. But at the same time, it's really easy for me, regardless of the mood I'm in, to start scrolling down Facebook, and within 30 seconds or a minute, feel terrible about myself. Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, look, everybody's so happy. Everybody's so healthy. Everybody's like on vacation in the Bahamas, and it's like, I'm a loser. I mean, it's like, but that's not, and the other thing is, so it's so easy, or then to go into judgment or comparison or criticism of what other people are posting or saying, but it's this kind of two-dimensional world that at some level, look, and I think it's like anything, it's how we use it. The platform itself is somewhat benign. But what ends up happening is it's a real trap for our ego, for my own ego, and for many of ours, that what we're doing is then, hey, I'm projecting this out to the world. I think again about my girls, and it's so funny. It's like, taking photos as we do incessantly of our children these days. That we, it's like all the pictures that we take and the videos, and like, hey, look, Susie scored a goal in the soccer game, and hey, well, look, we're at the. That's all fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that. But the reality is, like, how many times have we all taken a picture of our child, posted it on Facebook, and the thing that is not there is like the friggin' meltdown that happened 2 minutes before or after the photo that we took. And I'm not saying we need to post that, but it's like, if we did post a little bit of that more often, then at least most people wouldn't end up feeling crazy, like, oh my gosh, everyone else has this figured out and I don't.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of go on with the whole nothing changes until you do. What do you actually mean when we say that? I mean, kind of in that realm of the Facebook world, being authentic, but yet also, being able to strive forward like you did in your situation.
Yeah. Well, sorry about the ring here in the background. I forgot to unplug my phone.
Well, hold on just a minute too, because okay, never mind. My son, my little 7-year-old, he can't be very far away from me, and he decided he needed to use the bathroom, and I'm like, don't flush. It's
see,
right behind me.
But that's the world. That's the world we live in. I mean, right there. It's like that's the real stuff, right? It's like, oh, the phone's ringing. Oh, the kid's got to use the bathroom. It's like, I mean, again, it doesn't always look authenticity, and even like the whole idea of sort of nothing changes until you do. It doesn't mean that we have to share every little detailed piece of information going on in every moment. But the thing is, I wrote this most recent book for a couple of reasons. I had a conversation with, as I write a lot about in the book, there's a counselor I work with and have for the last few years named Eleanor. And Eleanor and I were having a conversation, and she said to me, look, Mike, you keep trying to change all the circumstances and situations in your life, and you keep thinking that if you do, then things will change, right? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, it doesn't work that way. It works the other way around. I said, what do you mean? She said, nothing changes until you do. And it wasn't like I'd never heard that before. That was a new concept. But something about the moment in which she said it and kind of what was going on, I went, whoa, wait a minute. That's so true. Like, really what happens in the way that we operate in life, whether it's with our children or our spouse or the work that we do or the people around us or the people in our family, it's really a shift. When we make the shift, everything flows from there. And when we don't, nothing does. Again, it's the Disneyland thing. It's like you don't have to be at Disneyland to be happy, but you could be there and be miserable. It's not about the circumstances. It's about you. Because we've all had that happen in life. We've been in the midst of a terrible thing going on in our life. And for whatever reason, even if for a fleeting moment, we were okay. And then on the flip side, we've been in the midst of like something amazing and been miserable. That's one of the most confusing things that happens in life. Something great happens in your life. And you've ever had this happen? Something really, really great happens. And you find yourself upset. And it like doesn't make any sense. And you're like, wait, why am I upset? Like I'm upset. I'm stressed out. I'm like not happy. Like I got this great thing going on. The joy, I think Benjamin Franklin said, there is no joy in life. It doesn't exist there. Joy exists within us. Right? And we keep thinking, well, if I just lost some weight, well, if I just, met someone new, well, if I just had a little more money, well, if this person who's driving me crazy just wasn't, if my kids were a little older or did whatever. I mean, fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
When I retire, there's always something that look, now we all have stuff in our lives and some stuff is more enjoyable than others. But again, we forget, like, we're the source of it.
Yeah. Before we go on, let us take a minute and hear about our sponsors. Changing a paradigm takes some study, but like me, you are probably super busy. That's why we've teamed up with Audible. Go to our website, theluminousmind.net, get a free month of Audible with 2 audiobooks, thousands of titles in exchange for only books that you absolutely love. You too can be learning on the go to keep that fire burning.
Go where no one has gone before. Share the paper that has your contract and borrow your soul. Free like a bird. Here I come. Go.
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with author and speaker Mike Robbins. And why do you think we're so hard on ourselves like that? I mean, where does that come from, and then how do you change that?
Well, there's 2 pieces of it. I mean, so what we do is we put our attention on the external stuff, the relationships and the external stuff outside of ourselves, thinking that that's how we end up creating some sense of peacefulness or fulfillment or enjoyment for ourselves, when in reality it comes from within us. And then what we end up doing is, for a variety of reasons, we end up being incredibly harsh to ourselves. Because basically 2 of the primary conversations that run us, I mean, this is how shame works, right? I mean, this is really what it is 1, we're not good enough. Not enough, not enough, not enough, not good enough, not smart enough, not, attractive enough, not accomplished enough, not enough, fill in the blank. And then if we get over that to some degree, that piece of like, I'm not enough, then the other conversation is, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Right? So you sort of it gets you coming and going, right? It's like you're either not enough, or as soon as you think, yeah, I am enough, then it's like, who do you think you are? Get back in your place. Right?
Yeah.
So then you can't win for losing. And in some ways, what I think that is, and I don't know for sure, I think fundamentally it's some defense mechanism of our ego, right? It's some element of like, we think that by being really hard on ourselves, we're going to keep ourselves safe. We're not going to get hurt. I'm going to protect myself. It's some shield we think we create. Okay, I'm going to be hypercritical of myself before anyone else can, because I'll be harder on myself than anybody else. Or if I'm really hard on myself, or I push myself really hard, then somehow, if I'm ever lucky enough to have any kind of success or fulfillment or enjoyment in my life, at least I will have, made myself miserable in the process so I don't have to feel guilty about it. Or I don't know what. It's some bizarre thing. I mean, one of the things that I often ask myself and other people is like, look, if you talked to another person the way you talk to yourself, how many friends do you think you'd have?
Yeah.
You know,
if
that's how nobody. Like, who would talk? You know, that's the thing. It's like, I was actually, it's funny. I did a podcast interview yesterday with this woman, and she's a therapist, and she said this really great thing about over the years in therapy that she talks to people about the importance of talking about yourself in the third person. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, I know, it seems really obnoxious, right? Like, that's like the most arrogant, self-absorbed, like, let me talk about Mike Robbins because Mike Robbins is right. She's like, but what I say to people is refer to yourself in the third person and imagine your self-talk if you used your own name, and then imagine if you weren't you and you were talking about someone else. Would you, right? And then it's like, wait a minute, replace your own name with someone else's name. And then if that person heard you talking about them that way, they would be really offended or upset, or their feelings hurt, or they wouldn't want to be friends with you, or they wouldn't trust you, or they would be like, what's up? You're super mean and cruel. Like, I don't understand. But we do that to ourselves all the time and don't think twice about it.
Exactly. Yeah. It kind of can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, don't you think, in a way, that we're tough on ourselves and then we make a lot of excuses, and then, you know, we don't make the changes that we can create the life that we really want.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us how you think your teaching and writing of, you know, nothing changes until you do relates to how we parent, and then also, you know, other relationships that we have, and then how we can hopefully change that and achieve that life that we want. Maybe the picture that's there of what we want.
Right. Well, I think
so. We're not so hard on ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think as it relates to parenting, you know, the best piece of parenting advice I ever got came years ago. It was when Michelle was pregnant with Samantha, who's our oldest, and Samantha's in 4th grade. She's 9.5. So this was about a decade ago that I got this advice. And Chris Anderson, who gave me the advice, is someone who's counseled me and mentored me for many, many years. And he said this great thing to me. He said, you know, Mike, when your daughter's born, you have 2 primary jobs. He said the first one's a really big one, but it's not even as hard as the second one. And he said the first job is to teach her how to be in the world, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff you got to teach her, all kinds of practical stuff. And it'll start from when she's really little, and it'll be walking and talking and, you know, and tying her shoes, and, you know, she gets to say please and thank you. And I mean, all this practical stuff. She gets older, it's going to be things about, you know, how do you drive a car, and how do you sort of manage your money, and, you know, for a long time, literally, like, for the rest of your life, like, your job, especially when she's young, but forever, is to teach her as many lessons as you can about how to operate in the world as best as possible. He's like, you'll mess up a bunch, you know, especially with your first one, but he said it's an enormous job. It's a huge responsibility. He said, but that's not even as important as the second job. He said, this one's the most important, and it's the hardest. He said, it's the most important job you have is to teach her how to love herself.
Well, especially, yeah.
And I said,
dad-daughter relationship is really important.
Right. And I said, how do I do that? And he said, you love yourself, and you let her see that. That's how you teach her how to love herself. How we treat ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we talk about ourselves is probably the most important thing that we teach our children. For as important as all the stuff we teach them, and you know this even better than I do as someone who's focused on homeschooling, and the things that we have to teach our children at home, whether they're at home or whether they're in school or anywhere that they are, there's a lot of stuff we teach them about life, about reading and writing and all kinds of things, and things going on in the world and culturally and nature and all that. But, like, in terms of them learning about themselves and learning about life and how to navigate through life, which, look, I'm a little biased on this front because I think there's so much debate these days about education and the best way to educate our children and where to send them and what to do and how to do it. And I think it's really great. And you would probably know better than I. But, you know, and I'm somebody who went through the school system in public schools and then went to a very good university and got a quote-unquote good education. But, like, I didn't learn a lot about how to live life. I didn't learn a lot about how to deal with my emotions. I didn't learn a lot about the stuff, how to navigate relationships, how to deal with
finances.
Finances, right? Both practical and emotional stuff, like how to deal with disappointment, right? How to think about, talk about, and relate to myself. Like, where did that ever come up in school? And so at some level, whether we're homeschooling our children or sending them off to school, or whether we're just being around them to whatever degree we are, how do we talk about ourselves? How do we treat ourselves? You know, some of the things they're learning now, and a lot of what the research tells us about young girls in particular, is their relationships with their mothers are so important, right? Fathers too, of course, in different ways. But it's like the likelihood of a young girl to have body image issues is directly correlated with how the mother feels about her body.
Wow.
Right?
How do you create an acceptance and that high self-esteem, but not narcissism, because you don't want to walk around, I'm so hot, hoping your daughter picks up on that.
No, but what it is, it's about it loving and appreciating yourself exactly how you are. So there's two things I would say about this, because look, it's not about narcissism or self-absorption at all, but part of it is there's a distinction between self-esteem and self-compassion, and they're both important. Now, we know from the research that self-esteem is fundamental, and we've been teaching and focusing on self-esteem with kids especially for a generation or two. And it's great, but part of the negative unintended consequence of all the focus we've had on self-esteem over the last generation or two is we're now raising a generation of young people who believe that they are exceptional at everything.
Yeah.
Right? Or if they're not exceptional, they should be. They need
everyone
to be.
gets a trophy.
Everyone gets a trophy. I have to stand out. My child is gifted. Very, very gifted, right? We have this, we're all like obsessed. And look, there are some children that are gifted, but this whole obsession with it, what's happened is what's now the case, right? And there's a wonderful professor at the University of Texas in Austin, and Dr. Kristen Neff, whose work I've been studying for a few years, and she's an expert on self-compassion. And what she talks about, though, is this whole obsession with self-esteem. And as a psychologist and as a researcher, what she knows is, look, if people have low levels of self-esteem, especially really low levels, it can be very dangerous. Depression, suicide, all kinds of things. So having self-esteem, a healthy amount of self-esteem, is essential. However, the way that self-esteem has been interpreted into our culture is, again, I need to stand out and be exceptional. And one of the examples that she uses in the TED Talk that she gives on this, she says, imagine if you came up to me after this TED Talk and you said, hey, Kristen, that was a very average talk. That would be like a huge, right, like so offensive. So how could you say that? But she said, in reality, most of the things we do are going to be average. Statistically, we're going to be average. In fact, below average, right? But this idea that we have to be good and great and exceptional is kind of where the self-esteem thing starts to go off the rails for all of us. And it leads to a certain amount of perfectionism. It leads to a certain amount of narcissism. It leads to a certain amount of self-importance. Self-compassion, on the other hand, is how we treat ourselves in the moment.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think to go along with that, what you were saying of our appearance, basically, of not wanting we want to be perfect, that creates a situation where we're not living that authentic life, that you've talked about before.
Exactly. But going back to the idea of our children, again, using the example of what do we model for our children? Now, this doesn't mean we have to be perfect. But if what we do, consciously or unconsciously, is speak and act negatively towards ourselves, I'm so fat, I'm so stupid, I can't do this, I'm not good at that, right? Like, I had this funny experience yesterday. I was getting ready. My wife and I went out on a date last night with some friends of ours, and we went into San Francisco to a place where it's one of these old school traditional places where you have to wear a coat and tie to dinner. But I can't tell you, like, unless it's like a funeral, and even at funerals these days, I almost never wear a tie to anything, right? So I'm getting ready to go out. And, listen, I got plenty of ties and suits, and I've worn suits and ties at different times in my life. But I had learned how to tie a tie. I was raised by a single mom. My dad wasn't around. I learned how to tie a tie when I was a little bit older than you normally would. And there's kind of one way I know how to tie a tie, and that's it. And I got this tie recently, and it's a new tie, and I'm tying it. And the way that I know how to tie it, it actually was looking funky. I'm looking in the mirror going, there's something wrong with this. And I was like, I know there's different types of knots. I've literally never learned how to tie a tie any other way than the one simple way I know how to do it, right? So I say to my younger daughter, Anna Rose, hey, Daddy doesn't know how to tie a tie in any other way than this. What do you think we can do? And she started, well, Daddy, I bet you could find a video on YouTube where it would show you. You're right, honey. Right? Now, this, again, is a conversation we wouldn't have had 20 years ago. But I said, you're right, honey. Let's go do that. So we walk into my office, and I open up my computer, and I go to YouTube, and I just type in how to tie a tie, right? And these videos pop up. And I sat there and I said to Anna Rose, well, let's see if we can figure this out. And I was frustrated. It wasn't working. And I said to her at one point, I was, wow, honey, I noticed I'm kind of nervous with you sitting there staring. She's like, oh, I'm sorry, Dad. I said, no, I don't want you to go away. We had this whole conversation. And I got frustrated at one point because my computer started to lock. The whole point of it was, though, I didn't go into it all that consciously, but I realized this is really important for my daughter to see me learn how to do something and struggle with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that does create that self-esteem that we talked about, right? Getting through those struggles, when we allow kids to get through those, It creates that. Is that where you're going with that?
Completely. So the idea being that, we got to allow our children to see all of who we are.
Yeah.
Right? It's not,
that authenticity again, right?
Yeah, age appropriately. It's not like we sit around and talk about our sex lives with our kids.
Yeah.
Age,
or sometimes money problems,
Exactly. I mean, certain things that are appropriate, but I do think in general, I think it's important that they see, do they see us loving and caring for ourselves? Do they also see us struggling in a certain way, but struggling with a sense of authenticity, with a sense of real ownership, not whining and complaining about ourselves? Because that's, again, look, they're picking up stuff from us all the time, and we know this. Not just the things that we tell them or we try to teach them, but how we act, how we treat each other, how we treat ourselves. So
the best lessons are caught, not taught. I mean, I've said it over and over.
Exactly.
Well, and kind of go through how that authenticity helps with that self-esteem, and then as parents, how we can, I guess, create that for that learning environment. Kind of go a little more.
I mean, I think, look, it's just... Kids are really good at picking up on what's real and true and what's not. Now, they don't always know all the facts and all the details, but they're often a lot of times even better and more in touch with their intuition and their emotional response to something.
Yeah. The Emperor Has No Clothes was done by,
exactly.
told by a child.
Exactly. And so I think the idea really is that to create the most authentic environment in which a child can learn. Look, I mean, I'll say one thing that I know for myself, that I have an enormous amount of respect and admiration for people who homeschool their children, is like, how do you create that environment? I mean, look, we don't homeschool our kids, and it's crazy sometimes around here, and I think to myself, man, I'm not sure how people do that, because like it would take to really be able to shift in and out of roles and shift from one to another, and we're home, and not to do it so you're beating yourself up or having some ridiculous perfection demand of how it's going to be, that you can have a sense of focus and a sense of here's what we're going to do, and here's the environment, and here's the rules, and here are the boundaries, but also know, like anything in life, this would be true, I imagine, for a classroom teacher. Right? You have a plan, and then you got to be able to have enough fluidity to deviate from the plan.
Yeah.
And I
go
do
with the flow.
Go with the flow. I mean, I think one of the things I remember somebody said to me a number of years ago, it was funny, I was doing a radio interview a long time ago, and the guy who was interviewing me, we were talking about authenticity. It was when my authenticity book came out, and his kids were probably, I don't know, they were like teenagers, and mine were, Samantha was probably 4, and Anna Rose was probably a year and a half or something. And he said, Mike, one of the things I've learned as a father, especially as my kids have gotten a little bit older, and even as they've gotten into teenage years and it's gotten challenging, he said, there are times where the best thing I can do is just tell the truth. I'll look at my son and I'll be like, look, I'm doing the best I can. I've never had a 14-year-old son before. Give me a break. You know what I mean? Like literally, like get off my back. I'm doing the best I can. And that's one of the things too, I think, that it's like, again, it's like the Facebook thing. It's like we do that with our children. We're sometimes performing for our children. We're acting like a mother or father's supposed to act instead of actually acting like we really are. And in some ways, look, I mean, there's all kinds of, controversy back and forth. Is it good to argue in front of your children or not? I mean, my wife and I try to be mindful of that, and we don't like to do that. But there are times when we'll have an argument in front of the girls, and they don't like it and it upsets them. But sometimes we'll stop and say, look, Mommy and Daddy love each other. And sometimes even when you love each other, you disagree and you bump heads, and it's okay. Like, love is strong enough.
That we're going to work through it. And
we're going to work it out. And and that's the same thing, because they're now getting into all their own little conflicts, and how do they work that stuff out? Some of it is by seeing how do Mommy and Daddy work it out when they get into an argument.
Yeah. And I think as a parent, when we show that vulnerability and that authenticity, like you said, I mean, it does help those children down the long run to be able to deal with their, problems. And that we can, if we keep showing that side of perfection, that I think that does create some self-esteem issues later down the road where they're like, Mom and Dad made this look perfect and easy. So how come I can't? Great.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, before we say goodbye, do you have any just final parting words for our audience? And then give us your contact information, how our listeners can get your books and learn more about your message.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, I think one other thing that I would share just as kind of a final thought, and it's related to parenting, but this is kind of in a larger sense really about my work and my life and my own practice, is, there's and I write about this in Nothing Changes Until You Do, but there's a game that I play with my girls, or a little saying that we have that we've been doing for a few years, and I'll ask them on a pretty consistent basis, a couple times a week, but I'll just ask them the question, how much does Daddy love you? And they respond in different ways. For a number of years, Samantha would raise her arms up as high as she could, and now Anna Rose will say to me, to the moon and back 1,000,000 times, or as high as God can count. I mean, she'll come up with some kind of funny, but the response is some version of a lot, right? And then I have a follow-up question that I ask, and I say, and how come Daddy loves you so much? And what the girls say in response to that question is, because I'm me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I say, that's right, just because you're you. And, I do it for two reasons. I do it for them. I want them to get the message that I don't love them just because they're cute, or just because Samantha got all the words right on the spelling test, or Anna Rose scored a goal in the soccer, or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't just love them when they follow the rules or when they pay attention. I mean, I appreciate when they do the things I like. Oh, that's all great, but the love is unconditional. So I really want them to get that message. But I do it for myself for two reasons. First of all, as a parent, right? Because it is easy to fall into the trap of constantly just responding to the behavior positively or negatively. I want to remind myself that even when they drive me nuts, I still love them. It's just a practice that my commitment is to unconditionally love them regardless of whether I like what's happening in the moment. But the other reason that I do it, in the more personal reason that I do it, is to remind myself of that I am lovable and valuable just because I'm me, not because I wrote a good book or because I gave a good speech or because I accomplished something. It's just because I'm me. And so fundamentally, when we can get to that place, that's when we have real freedom.
Yeah. Well, and that uniqueness about each one of us is really what makes us spectacular. I mean, that's very important to focus on that with your children, that unconditional love, that you're going to love them for their uniqueness, not for who you think they should be.
Exactly.
Versus, that's awesome. I love that.
Exactly. Yeah, and as far as being in touch with me, I mean, the best place to reach me is on my website, which is mike-robbins.com, and there's links to my books and ways to connect with me on social media, and you can sign up for my free email newsletter, and there's lots of videos and podcasts and stuff up there that are, if what we're talking about here and what I'm talking about resonates with people, they can definitely check out mike-robbins.com.
You've done a couple different TED Talks as well as motivational speakers, and I've seen that on your website, and they're really fun and great to listen to, very inspirational. And I appreciate the time that you spent with us this afternoon. It is super fun to talk to you, and I've been inspired, and I hope my audience checks you out and your message. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Mike Robbins and to get his links, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and consider joining our program by going to the scheduling tab to become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website. Also, sign up to receive 2 free audiobooks from Audible at theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, and now Pinterest. Get our audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider telling your friends about us. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.